Monster Island, a Japanese prisoner and a British soldier are chained together after their ship is attacked. They escape to a deserted island, only to discover that something terrifying is hunting them from beneath the water. The story begins during World War II, in May 1944, when a Japanese trader named Saito is being transported with other prisoners back to his homeland, where they are expected to be forced into slave labor. Saito is kept alone in a cell until two guards arrive and take him to the ship's commander. Inside the cabin, the officer looks at him with contempt and says that betraying his own country is unforgivable, claiming that even death would not be enough punishment for what he has done. Soon, more soldiers enter the room with a British prisoner named Bronson, who immediately shows his hatred toward the Japanese. The commander then reveals his cruel plan, explaining that the two men will remain chained together for the rest of their lives. The soldiers approach and lock chains around their feet. Bronson struggles against them, clearly refusing to accept his enemy, but the guards eventually overpower him and force the two men together. Just when they believe this will be their fate, an enemy attack suddenly strikes the Japanese ship, causing the prisoners to rebel. Bronson and Saito see their chance and join the fight against the soldiers. A submarine approaches the ship and launches a missile toward it, creating even more chaos. Inside the commander's cabin, only the officer and the two prisoners remain, and the commander pulls out a gun, preparing to execute them. In a desperate move, Bronson grabs Saito and jumps with him into the sea moments before the explosion destroys the ship. Hours later, Bronson reaches a deserted island while carrying the exhausted Saito through the water. As soon as they reach the shore, Bronson collapses from exhaustion. The following day, Saito wakes up believing everything was only a nightmare. But when he looks down and sees that he is still chained to Bronson, he realizes it was all real. He tries to wake the British soldier, but Bronson remains unconscious. Nearby, Saito discovers the body of a dead soldier washed onto the beach and crawls toward it to take his weapon. As he begins thinking about shooting Bronson, the British man suddenly wakes and attacks him. The two men struggle violently at the water's edge, but something strange begins moving beneath the waves. Bronson manages to overpower Saito and tries to drown him, but Saito's injured leg starts bleeding. The smell of blood attracts an unknown creature, which suddenly grabs Bronson and drags him away from the shore. The British soldier is attacked by a terrifying creature with sharp claws and incredibly fast movements. Saito grabs the weapon and aims at Bronson, but instead chooses to shoot the creature. The shot makes the monster retreat and disappear into the water. Bronson is badly injured, and both men now realize that something far more dangerous than their hatred is living on the island. They reluctantly agree to a temporary truce and decide that working together may be their only chance to survive. Away from the beach, Bronson asks what the creature was, but because they cannot understand each other's language, Saito cannot answer him properly. Still, his expression makes it clear that he knows exactly what they encountered. Saito sits silently for a while and eventually attempts to take his own life, but Bronson stops him and asks if he has lost his mind. Bronson then takes the last remaining bullet from the gun and gives it to Saito, suggesting that they work together and save it for the creature that is hunting them. Soon, the two discover several supplies that have washed ashore. Bronson finds a packet of cigarettes and offers one to Saito, but Saito refuses, looking defeated and hopeless. While searching through the scattered supplies, Bronson discovers the body of a young companion. He becomes emotional and says that the boy had his whole life ahead of him, but that it was taken away because Saito's country started the war. Although Saito cannot understand his words, he understands Bronson's grief and offers him some water. Bronson accepts the water, and the two continue collecting supplies before night arrives. Once it becomes dark, they build a simple camp and try to rest. Bronson attempts to put on his boot, but the chain makes it difficult and causes him pain. Saito remembers taking larger boots from a dead Japanese soldier earlier and offers one to Bronson, but the British man refuses because he does not want to wear anything belonging to his enemy. Saito then catches some crabs and offers one to Bronson, who accepts because he has not eaten for days. Bronson struggles to hold it and accidentally drops it into the sand. Seeing this, Saito gives Bronson his own crab. Bronson refuses at first, but Saito insists and leaves the food beside him. Eventually, Bronson tries it and enjoys the meal, and the two men slowly begin becoming more comfortable around each other. Bronson then decides to introduce himself properly. He points to himself and says his name, and Saito manages to understand and repeat it. Saito then introduces himself as well. Bronson asks what they're going to do about the chains, but Saito remains silent. Later, Bronson creates an improvised tool and tries to break the chain. His first attempts fail until Saito notices that one part of the chain near his own foot is weaker. He points toward it and says something in Japanese. Bronson does not understand the words, but understands the gesture and decides to try. With 2 strikes, the weakened link finally loosens, exciting both men. Now it is Saito's turn, so he asks Bronson for the tool. Bronson hesitates, but eventually trusts him. Before Saito strikes, Bronson says he will look away, causing Saito to laugh. Saito then hits the chain once and frees Bronson. The two celebrate their freedom, but their excitement soon attracts something watching them from the darkness. Saito senses that something is nearby, and both men become alert, but the presence quickly disappears. They arm themselves and search the area for clues. Saito discovers strange tracks in the sand and begins following them, but their investigation is interrupted by a voice. When they turn around, they see a Japanese soldier approaching. Soon they realize there are actually two soldiers, and they have another prisoner with them. Bronson immediately suspects that Saito may betray him, but Saito hands him his machete as a sign of trust and silently tells him to hide. Saito remains at the camp while the soldiers approach. One of them notices food boiling over the fire and decides to investigate. He discovers someone apparently sleeping at the camp, but Saito reveals himself and asks them not to shoot. The soldiers do not know that Saito has been branded a traitor, and therefore decide to trust him. Meanwhile, Bronson stays hidden and fails to notice that the danger is approaching from behind him. At the camp, Saito speaks with one of his former comrades and asks whether anyone else survived. The soldier explains that only they escaped because they were wearing life jackets while everyone else drowned. At that moment, Bronson realizes too late that the sea creature is standing behind him. Terrified, he closes his eyes, but when he opens them again, the creature has disappeared. The Japanese soldier then looks around and asks whether Saito is truly alone on the island. Saito says that he is, but the soldiers notice several signs that another person has been staying nearby. One soldier stands with his katana and recalls a rumor from before the shipwreck about a Japanese traitor and an enemy prisoner who were chained together. He then uncovers Saito's injured foot. The soldier says that people in such a situation usually try to kill themselves, but Saito's case seems different. The other soldier demands to know where the fugitive is. Saito claims that Bronson is dead and points toward the grave where they buried Bronson's young companion. The Japanese soldier realizes that Saito is lying and calls him both a traitor and a liar. He threatens to cut Saito's throat with his katana unless he reveals where the British prisoner is hiding. Before he can act, a terrifying roar suddenly echoes across the island, making everyone freeze. The other prisoner panics and says that it must be the tribe of fishmen. He falls to his knees and begins praying. One of the Japanese soldiers orders the youngest man to investigate the strange noise. The soldier cautiously moves away from the camp and begins searching the surrounding area. Nearby, Bronson remains hidden, but when the soldier gets closer, he accidentally steps on a dry branch, creating a loud crack. The sound immediately catches the soldier's attention, and he begins moving toward Bronson's hiding place. But before he can reach him, the creature lets out a frightening growl from another direction, causing the soldier to change course and giving Bronson a brief moment of relief. The Japanese soldier continues searching until he reaches the entrance of a nearby cave. He enters and walks deeper inside, unaware that the monster is perfectly camouflaged among the rocks near the entrance. Meanwhile, Bronson uses the distraction as a chance to try to rescue his friend. Inside the cave, the creature suddenly reveals itself behind the soldier. The man turns around and attempts to stab it with his weapon, but the monster quickly attacks and tears off his arm. His scream echoes across the island, alerting the others. The second soldier assumes Saito is responsible and prepares to kill him, but Bronson suddenly attacks and delivers a fatal blow. Bronson then prepares to finish the wounded enemy with a gunshot, but the creature suddenly appears and throws the soldier's severed head toward them while releasing a terrifying scream. Horrified, Bronson and Saito run away and hide as the fishman approaches the injured soldier and kills him. The remaining prisoner desperately tries to escape, but the creature quickly catches him and kills him as well. Watching from a distance, Bronson and Saito realize they have to leave immediately. However, the creature notices them and begins chasing them through the jungle. The two men run through the thick bushes, while Saito uses his machete to clear a path. Bronson says he has a plan and asks Saito to wait, but Saito cannot understand him and continues forward. Bronson stumbles and falls behind, allowing the creature to catch up. Desperate, he fires the gun but misses, wasting their final bullet. The creature grabs Bronson by the neck and raises its claws to kill him, but Saito suddenly returns and attacks the monster, forcing it to release Bronson. The two men take the opportunity to escape, but while running downhill, they lose their balance and tumble down a steep slope. They suffer serious injuries before finally losing consciousness. The next day, both men wake up badly injured. Saito notices that a thick branch is lodged in his chest. Fighting through the pain, he slowly stands and pulls the branch out. Bronson, meanwhile, is lying on a piece of rotten wood hanging over the edge of a waterfall. When he tries to move, the log begins to sway dangerously. He struggles to keep his balance but eventually slips, hits a rock below and falls into the water. While underwater, Bronson remembers the earlier attack and struggles to stay conscious. With great effort, he manages to swim toward the shore and pulls himself out. Saito discovers the katana belonging to the dead Japanese soldier and takes it with him. Now separated, The two men continue moving along different parts of the river, each hoping to find the other. Suddenly, the fishman releases a terrifying scream from somewhere near the top of the waterfall. The sound echoes throughout the forest and is heard by both men. Saito, who is crouched beside the river drinking water, immediately becomes alert and decides to stop searching the area alone so he can find Bronson. Meanwhile, Bronson continues climbing through the forest by himself. Eventually, Bronson reaches another huge waterfall blocking his path. With no other route available, he decides to climb around it. The difficult journey leaves him exhausted, while Saito continues moving through the forest without knowing where his friend is. After crossing the waterfall, Bronson decides to stop and rest, but he soon hears strange noises nearby. Saito also hears the sounds from somewhere in the forest and becomes cautious. Bronson finally reaches the edge of the river and sits down to recover. Moments later, he senses something beside him. When he turns around, he finds himself face to face with an enormous crocodile. With no way to escape, Bronson remains completely still as the animal watches him. After a tense moment, the crocodile simply turns away and returns to the water. Bronson remains shocked by the encounter, but eventually gets up and continues walking. He reaches an area near the top of the waterfall, but suddenly loses his footing. At that moment, he notices the creature nearby, apparently treating the wound caused by Saito earlier. Bronson realizes that the fishman is much more intelligent than they originally thought. He wants to escape and warn Saito, but accidentally makes a noise and quickly crouches down to avoid being discovered. From his hiding place, he watches as the creature approaches the river. Suddenly, the same crocodile attacks it and drags it into the water. The river quickly turns red with blood, and the crocodile's body floats on the surface for a few moments. Then the fishman suddenly rises from the water and violently tears the crocodile in half. Bronson watches in complete horror, realizing that the monster is even more powerful than he imagined. The creature then releases another terrifying roar, which Saito hears from the other side of the forest. Bronson immediately runs away before the creature can discover him. Saito continues searching for his friend until he comes across something unusual. He approaches carefully and discovers a dead body tied to a tree. The sight frightens him, causing him to lose his balance and fall into a hidden hole. Inside the hole, Saito discovers the severed head of another fishman. He examines it carefully and realizes that the creature can actually be killed. This discovery gives him new hope. He climbs out and searches the dead man's body for anything useful. Saito finds a firearm still in the dead man's hand. He also notices several spent bullet casings scattered nearby, and realizes that this man was the one who killed the other creature. Saito takes the gun and checks the ammunition. Now carrying both his katana and the firearm, he decides to hunt down the fishman and find Bronson. While moving through the forest, Saito discovers the wreckage of a crashed airplane. Part of the aircraft is submerged in the water, so he decides to enter and investigate. As he approaches the plane, he notices something inside the wreckage. At the same time, Bronson discovers another piece of the aircraft's broken fuselage and eventually reaches the same plane. Before entering, Bronson collects some pieces of scrap metal and uses them to make an improvised spear. He then enters the partially submerged aircraft and begins searching for supplies. Inside, he finds several useful objects, including a flare gun, a lighter, cigarettes, and other equipment. While searching, one particular object catches his attention. When Bronson reaches toward it, he slips and notices something attached to the plane's wing. He moves closer and discovers a bomb. The discovery immediately gives him an idea. Soon afterward, Bronson sits down for a moment and lights a cigarette. As he smokes, he suddenly hears footsteps approaching. Bronson turns around and sees that it is Saito. He notices that Saito is trembling and offers him a cigarette, but Saito refuses and urgently tries to show him something. Bronson cannot understand his words, so Saito uses the lighter to gesture toward what he wants to explain. The two men then walk together toward a nearby cave. When they arrive, Saito points towards something hidden inside. Bronson looks carefully and realizes that the fishman is inside the cave, guarding something. The creature is incubating an egg, revealing that the monster has been protecting its unborn offspring all along. Bronson slowly moves closer to the nest, but Saito warns him that the creature is female and extremely protective of its offspring. Bronson refuses to leave without killing it, while Saito explains that doing so will only make the creature more furious. Bronson insists that they have no other choice and says it is either them or the monster. He then tells Saito that he has an idea and asks him to follow, while the creature realizes that Saito has taken the weapon from the soldier it killed. Back near the wreckage, Bronson shows Saito the bomb he discovered and asks him to help carry it to the creature's nest. After struggling with the heavy device, the two men manage to transport it to the cave. Once there, they discover that the trigger mechanism is bent, and Bronson desperately tries to repair it. Saito keeps warning him that they cannot remain in the creature's territory for long. Meanwhile, the fishman is already returning toward its nest. Bronson remembers that an emergency axe is inside the crashed plane and believes it could help them. However, someone will need to stay behind and activate the device. Saito looks at Bronson sadly and admits that his actions were the reason they were brought to this place. He offers to remain behind, but before they can decide, the creature's terrifying growl suddenly echoes through the cave. The two men quickly move outside and Bronson activates the flare to illuminate the darkness. Saito stays behind to guard the area while Bronson rushes toward the crashed plane to retrieve the emergency axe. When he finds it, he discovers that the weapon is firmly stuck in the metal. He pulls repeatedly, struggling to free it before the creature returns. Suddenly, the monster appears directly in front of Saito. He immediately prepares himself and attacks. The two engage in a fierce fight, with the creature skillfully defending itself against his attacks. Meanwhile, Bronson continues struggling with the axe until he finally manages to tear it free from the plane. Saito fights the creature at close range and manages to kick it toward the wreckage, giving Bronson an opening to attack. Bronson strikes the monster with the axe several times, and together they manage to force it back. For a moment, they believe they have trapped the creature, but when they look toward the sky, they notice the flare is fading. When they turn their attention back to the monster, it has completely disappeared. Realizing they cannot waste any more time, Bronson and Saito return to the cave. Saito takes up his position as lookout while Bronson works desperately to repair the bomb's damaged latch. Just as Bronson finally fixes the mechanism, the creature suddenly appears behind him and attacks. Saito reacts immediately and stabs the monster in the chest. He prepares to finish it, but the creature violently throws him against the cave wall and turns back toward Bronson. The monster attacks Bronson and seriously wounds his chest. Seeing his friend in danger, Saito forces himself back up, grabs the firearm, and fires directly into the creature's eye. The shot makes it release Bronson, and Saito fires again, but this time he misses. With another chance running out, Saito changes his target and shoots the creature's egg. The shot destroys the egg and kills the hatchling inside. The creature immediately rushes toward its offspring, becoming enraged when it realizes that the hatchling is dead. Saito tries to reach Bronson, but his friend is already severely injured. Bronson gives Saito his belongings and tells him to leave. While the creature holds its dead hatchling, Saito reluctantly abandons Bronson and escapes from the cave. The monster then turns toward Bronson, who quickly activates the bomb. He begins counting down, but when he reaches 3, nothing happens. The bomb appears to be useless. Then Bronson remembers how Saito helped him break the chain earlier and realizes he can use the same method to fix the mechanism. Bronson applies what Saito taught him and finally manages to activate the bomb. A huge explosion tears through the cave while Saito watches from outside. Believing his friend has sacrificed himself, Saito sadly moves away from the area. But then he hears the creature's terrifying growl again. The monster has survived the explosion. Saito immediately runs through the bushes as the creature begins chasing him through the forest. He races toward the beach and eventually drops to his knees, completely exhausted and without hope. Then Saito remembers Bronson's sacrifice and becomes determined to fight. When the creature arrives at the beach, it sees Saito kneeling in the sand and charges toward him. But Saito suddenly rises, revealing that he has prepared a trap for the monster. The creature falls into the trap and Saito immediately attacks. He strikes the monster but is also injured during the fight. Despite his wounds, he refuses to surrender and continues facing the creature directly. Saito challenges the monster to come closer. When it charges at him, he dodges the attack and delivers several strikes with his katana. One powerful slash cuts across the creature's abdomen, causing it to collapse onto the sand. Saito walks toward the weakened creature and raises his katana, apparently preparing to finish it. But instead, he drives the blade into the ground beside the monster and steps away. He then grabs a flare after hearing strange noises coming from the forest. Saito moves toward the beach and tries to activate the flare, but it is broken. With his final hope gone, he collapses onto the sand from exhaustion and eventually loses consciousness. Meanwhile, the smoke from the earlier explosion continues rising into the sky, unknowingly becoming a signal that will eventually lead rescuers to him. Hours later, Saito wakes up aboard an American ship where an officer is questioning him with the help of a Japanese translator. The officer asks whether Bronson helped him survive, but Saito remains silent. The officer then orders the translator to ask Saito what crime he committed. Saito finally explains that he killed his commander because he could no longer tolerate watching his fellow soldiers die because of meaningless orders. The officer returns to the subject of Bronson and asks what happened to the British prisoner. Saito remains quiet as memories of the island begin returning to him. He remembers how the two men first hated each other, how they were forced to depend on one another, and how their relationship slowly changed during their struggle to survive. Despite beginning as enemies from opposite sides of the war, Saito eventually came to see Bronson as a true friend. Their time together on the island had changed both men, and Bronson's final sacrifice remained in Saito's mind as the most painful part of the entire ordeal. The officer then asks whether anyone is still alive on the island. Saito calmly answers that there is nobody left. The officer accepts his response as the ship continues moving away from the shore. Saito looks through the ship's window toward the island, silently remembering everything that happened there. The final reveal makes it clear that the nightmare on the island has not truly ended. And that's how Monster Island ends. Saito escapes, but the final scene reveals that the creatures are still alive. Thanks for watching.